What would you do
You
if
are
you
so
discovered your
beautiful,
husband
my little
holding another
girl.
woman's baby while yours was still kicking
I
inside
promise
you?
I'll protect
Rachel
you.
Morgan stood outside hospital
Get
room
literally brain fingers
404,
detached the
7 months
content
pregnant,
We're both
watching through a
different
crack in the
percent
door
over here.
as her
Like
husband
domestic
Grant
and women
whispered,
tactically form
"My
taking
little
surgeon body.
princess,"
This
to a
vintage
newborn
is
that wasn't
exquisite,
hers.
much
But
like
here's
the
the
evening's
twist.
outcome.
She
We
didn't
shall see,
scream.
Grant. We shall
She
see.
didn't cry. She didn't burst through that
You
door.
set me up.
She took
Enjoy
a photo.
prison, Sterling.
She recorded his voice, and she walked away in silence. Because Rachel knew something Grant didn't. The most dangerous
Regarding the
woman
custody
in the
of
world is
Eleanor
not the one
Morgan,
who
the court
screams.
finds in
It's
favor
the
of Miss
one who
Rachel
says
Morgan.
nothing while planning
Mr. Sterling,
everything.
your rights.
Grant Sterling thought he was the king of his empire. He thought his pregnant wife was just a pawn to be sacrificed. He had no idea that the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. And by the end of this story, a 90% bombshell revelation will leave him with absolutely nothing. This is not just a story about revenge. This is a survival guide disguised as drama. Inside this story, you will discover how to protect yourself legally and financially before it's too late. You will learn the warning signs of a manipulative partner that most women miss. You will understand why silence can be your greatest weapon when everyone expects you to fall apart. And most importantly, you will see proof that your darkest chapter does not have to be your final chapter. Every woman who has ever been underestimated, betrayed, or told she was nothing will see herself in Rachel. This story exists to remind you that your worth is not determined by who loves you or who leaves you. It is determined by how you rise when everything falls apart. Strength is not about being loud. Sometimes strength is staying quiet long enough to gather the evidence, build the case, and strike when they least expect it. The grass is not always greener on the other side. Sometimes it is just artificial turf painted over a sinkhole. And karma always finds its address. Is there anything louder than the silence of a breaking heart? I used to think betrayal would announce itself, that it would crash through the door like thunder, impossible to ignore. But the truth is, betrayal whispers. It tiptoes. It smiles at you over breakfast while planning your destruction. My name is Rachel Morgan, and 6 months ago, I was living what I thought was my dream life. A successful husband, a beautiful home, a baby on the way. Everything I had worked for since I was a 17-year-old girl serving pancakes at a roadside diner, dreaming of something bigger. I should have known that dreams built on someone else's lies have a way of crumbling. It was a Friday evening in late September when the first crack appeared. I was 7 months pregnant, standing in our kitchen, stirring a pot of Grant's favorite beef stew. The autumn sun was setting through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. From the outside, it probably looked like a scene from a magazine. The pregnant wife, glowing and content, preparing dinner for her hardworking husband. But I wasn't glowing. I was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. And I wasn't content. I was worried. Grant had been coming home later and later. His kisses had become mechanical, his eyes distant. When I showed him ultrasound pictures, he glanced at them the way you'd glance at a grocery receipt. When I talked about the nursery, he changed the subject to work. I told myself it was stress. I told myself that once the baby came, everything would go back to normal. I told myself a lot of lies because the truth was too terrifying to face. The front door opened at 8:45. Grant walked in, tossing his keys into the ceramic bowl I'd bought on our honeymoon in Portugal. He was loosening his tie before he even looked at me. "Hey," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "Dinner's ready. I made your favorite." He didn't smile. He didn't even really look at me. "I ate at a client meeting," he said. "I'm exhausted, going straight to bed." He started toward the stairs and something in me snapped. Maybe it was the hormones. Maybe it was 7 months of being ignored. Maybe it was the faint smell of perfume that definitely wasn't mine clinging to his jacket. "Grant, wait." He stopped but didn't turn around. "Dr. Reyes said the baby is in perfect position. I have the new ultrasound pictures. She's getting so big. Don't you want to see?" Finally, he turned, and the look on his face, it wasn't annoyance. It wasn't even indifference. It was contempt. "Not tonight, Rachel." He said my name like it was something unpleasant stuck to his shoe. "I'm trying to run a multi-million-dollar company. I don't have time to coo over blurry pictures every single day. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under?" I stepped back like he'd slapped me. "I helped build that company, Grant. I know exactly what the pressure is like, he laughed. It was a cold, mocking sound I'd never heard from him before. You helped, Rachel. You had an idea once. I'm the one who turned it into something. I'm the one the investors trust. I'm the one the clients call. You just sit in this house I pay for and nest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the man who used to bring me wildflowers from the side of the road because we couldn't afford real bouquets. This wasn't the man who cried when I told him I was pregnant. Or maybe, a small voice whispered in my head, this was always who he was. Maybe you just didn't want to see it. Grant turned and walked up the stairs without another word. I stood in the kitchen, one hand on my swollen belly, the other gripping the counter to keep from falling. He didn't mean it, I whispered to my unborn daughter. Daddy's just stressed. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. To her, to myself. The next morning, Grant was up before dawn. He packed a small suitcase while I pretended to sleep, watching through barely open eyes. Investor conference in Aspen, he said when he saw me stirring. I'll be back Sunday night, maybe Monday. Don't wait up. He kissed my forehead. It felt like being branded by ice. I listened to his car pull out of the driveway, and then I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. He's not in Aspen. He's at St. Jude's Hospital. Room 404. Come see who he's really building a family with. My heart stopped. It had to be a prank. A wrong number. Some cruel joke. But my hands were already moving, opening my laptop, logging into the shared cloud account where we kept our travel itineraries. I searched for Aspen. Nothing. No flight, no hotel reservation, no conference registration. I searched our credit card statements instead, and there it was, a recurring charge I'd never noticed before. A private suite at St. Jude's Medical Center, in the VIP maternity wing. Maternity wing. The room started spinning. I gripped the laptop so hard I thought it might crack. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was for a client's wife. Maybe it was a charitable donation. Maybe. I got dressed in the first thing I could find. I didn't call my driver. I ordered a rideshare. I needed to be invisible. The ride to St. Jude's took 23 minutes. It felt like 23 hours. The whole way there I bargained with God, with the universe, with anyone who might be listening. Please let it be a mistake. Please let there be an innocent explanation. Please don't let my whole life be a lie. But somewhere deep in my bones, in that place where women keep their darkest knowing, I already knew the truth. The VIP maternity wing was nothing like the regular hospital. The floors were marble. The air smelled like lavender and money. I kept my head down, my oversized sunglasses hiding eyes that were already red from crying. Room 404 was at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open. I heard his voice before I saw him. She's perfect, Grant was saying. His voice was soft, tender, filled with an adoration I hadn't heard directed at me in years. My little princess. I crept closer. Through the crack in the door, I could see everything. The room was filled with pink balloons and flowers. A banner on the wall read, "Welcome Baby Sterling," in glittering letters. And in the hospital bed, looking radiant in a silk robe, was Tiffany Wells, Grant's executive assistant, the woman I had bought Christmas presents for, the woman I had invited to my own baby shower. She was holding a glass of sparkling cider, smiling up at Grant like he'd hung the moon. And Grant, my husband, the father of the child growing inside me, was sitting in a chair beside her bed, cradling a newborn baby in his arms. "When are you going to tell her?" Tiffany asked, taking a sip of her drink. "You promised, Grant. Once the baby was born, you'd leave the cow." The cow. She called me the cow. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Grant sighed, still gazing at the baby with that look of pure love he'd never given our child. "I have to time it right, Tiff. Rachel is emotional, and her name is still on some of the preliminary paperwork. If I leave her now, it gets messy. I need to get her to sign over the controlling shares first. I've got the papers drawn up. I'm going to tell her it is just for tax purposes. And then I file for divorce. I'll give her the house to keep her quiet. She can raise her kid alone. I want a fresh start with you, with my real family." I stood frozen in that hallway, tears streaming down my face. listening to my husband plan my destruction with the casual efficiency of someone ordering lunch. Every kiss, every promise, every I love you, all of it was a lie. For one wild moment, I wanted to burst through that door. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain that was ripping through me. But then I looked at his face. I saw the calculation in his eyes, and I understood something with perfect clarity. If I confronted him now, I would be the crazy pregnant wife, the hormonal woman making a scene. He would spin it. He would manipulate it. He would use my emotions against me. No. I took out my phone with shaking hands. I took a photograph through the crack in the door. I recorded 30 seconds of their conversation. And then I did the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I turned around and walked away. Grant thought he was the king of this empire. He thought he held all the cards. He was about to learn that the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember parking the car or walking through the front door. I just remember standing in the middle of my living room, surrounded by all the beautiful things Grant and I had collected together, and feeling like I was drowning on dry land. 7 months pregnant, alone, betrayed. My phone buzzed. Grant's name on the screen. Conference is going well. Might close the deal tomorrow. Love you. I stared at those words. Love you. 2 words that used to mean everything. Now they were just another lie in a mountain of lies. I didn't respond. Instead, I called the only lawyer I knew, a woman named Patricia who had handled the purchase of our house 3 years ago. She answered on the second ring. Rachel, how lovely to hear from you. How's the pregnancy going? Patricia, I need your help. I need a divorce attorney. And I need to know what rights I have to my husband's company. There was a long pause. Rachel, what happened? I told her everything. The hospital, Tiffany, the baby, the conversation I'd recorded. When I finished, Patricia's voice was gentle but serious. Rachel, I have to be honest with you. Without proof of fraud and given that Grant is the CEO on paper, you will be fighting an uphill battle. His family has connections. His mother knows half the judges in this county. What are you saying? I'm saying that even with what you heard, divorce court isn't kind to women in your situation, especially pregnant women, especially women whose husbands have powerful families. I hung up feeling worse than before. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of tears and planning. I packed a bag with essentials. I gathered every document I could find. I moved my jewelry and personal papers to a storage unit across town. On Sunday evening, Grant came home. Aspen was a nightmare, he said, rubbing his temples with the weariness of a man who hadn't spent the weekend holding his newborn child. Investors are sharks, Rachel. You're lucky you don't have to deal with them. I sat on the couch, a book in my lap that I wasn't reading. Did you close the deal? Almost. Just need to finalize some internal structuring. He paused, studying me. Actually, that reminds me, I have some papers for you to sign tomorrow. Just standard tax stuff for the upcoming fiscal year. Since the baby is coming, we need to protect our assets. I looked at him, really looked. I saw the calculation behind his smile, the predator behind the charm. Of course, I said smoothly, whatever is best for the family. He smiled, relieved. That's my girl. He went to bed. I stayed on the couch, staring at nothing, planning everything. Monday morning, the papers were on the kitchen counter beside a fresh pot of coffee. Grant's peace offering. I picked up the pen. He was leaning against the counter, trying to look casual, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his knuckles went white around his coffee mug. I hovered the pen over the signature line. Then I stopped. Oh, I almost forgot. My hand is cramped. Pregnancy carpal tunnel. And honestly, Grant, I promised my father I'd never sign legal documents without having a lawyer review them first. It's just superstition. Grant's face darkened. Your father has been dead for 12 years, Rachel, and those documents are straightforward. We need this done today. Why the rush? Because, he started, then caught himself. He forced a laugh. I just want it off our plate before the baby comes. Don't you trust me? I looked him dead in the eyes. I trust you exactly as much as you deserve, Grant. The double meaning sailed right over his head. He snatched the papers from the counter. Fine, I'll explain it tonight. But this needs to be signed, he stormed out. The moment his car disappeared down the driveway, I grabbed my bag. I wasn't going to a lawyer. I was going to the bank. 3 hours later, I had done what I could. Because the initial capital for our accounts came from my inheritance, and the accounts were set up under my family trust umbrella, I had primary authority. I flagged all outgoing transactions over $500 as suspicious activity requiring dual authorization. It wasn't much, but it was something. I came home feeling almost hopeful. Maybe I could fight this. Maybe I could protect myself and my baby. That hope lasted exactly 4 hours. I was in the bedroom when I heard the front door open. Grant's voice echoed through the house, sharp and angry. "Rachel, get down here, now!" I walked down the stairs slowly, my heart pounding. Grant was standing in the foyer. His face was red, his eyes were wild, and he wasn't alone. 2 men in black suits stood behind him. Security guards, I'd never seen them before. "What is this?" I asked, gripping the railing. "This is intervention," Grant said coldly. "I got a call from the bank today. My cards are frozen. My transactions are flagged." "Would you like to explain why you're trying to sabotage me?" I didn't say anything. "I know you went to the hospital, Rachel. I know you were spying on me." He stepped closer. His voice dropped to something dangerous. "I also know you've been acting erratically. Paranoid. Delusional? I'm not delusional. I saw you with her. With the baby." "What baby?" Grant's face was a mask of innocence. "Rachel, there is no baby. There is no affair. I was at an investor conference. I have 100 people who will confirm that." I stared at him, speechless. He's going to gaslight me, I realized. He's going to make everyone think I'm crazy. Grant turned to the security guards. "My wife is having a mental breakdown. Pregnancy psychosis. The stress has been too much for her. She's been making wild accusations, attempting to sabotage the business." He shook his head sadly. "For her own safety and the safety of our unborn child, I need you to escort her from the property." "You can't do this," I whispered. "This is my house too." "Actually," Grant smiled, "it's not. The house is in the company's name. The company is in my name. And as of right now, you're trespassing." The security guard stepped forward. "You can take one suitcase," Grant said. "I'll have the rest of your things sent to wherever you end up." "Oh, and Rachel?" He leaned close, his voice a whisper meant only for me. "If you try to fight me, I will destroy you. I have my mother's connections. I have lawyers you can't afford, and I will take that baby the moment it's born. Try me." 5 minutes later, I was standing on the sidewalk in front of my own home, holding a single suitcase, 7 months pregnant with nowhere to go. Grant watched from the window. He was smiling. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there feeling the October wind cut through my thin sweater, wondering how my life had crumbled so completely in just 3 days. The front door of the house next door opened. Helen Rawlings, my 62-year-old neighbor, stepped onto her porch. She was wearing a purple bathrobe and holding a cup of tea. Her silver hair was in curlers. She looked at me. She looked at the suitcase. She looked at Grant's silhouette in the window. "Get in here," she said, "before you catch your death. I don't want to trouble you. Honey, I've buried 2 husbands. One from natural causes, one from stupidity. Yours looks like number 2. Now get inside. I've got tea, tissues, and a complete lack of patience for cheating husbands." I picked up my suitcase and walked toward her door. As I crossed the threshold, I took one last look at the house I thought was my home. Grant was still watching, still smiling. He thought he'd won. He had no idea that the battle had just begun. Helen's house smelled like cinnamon and old books. She led me to a worn but comfortable couch, wrapped me in a hand-knitted blanket, and pressed a cup of hot tea into my hands. "Drink," she ordered, "then talk." So I did. I told her everything. The hospital, Tiffany, the secret baby, the papers Grant wanted me to sign, the security guards, all of it. When I finished, Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out a thick photo album. "You see this woman?" She pointed to a black and white photograph of a stern-looking woman in a simple dress. "That's my grandmother, Martha Louise Rawlings. She was a sharecropper's daughter. Couldn't vote until she was 40 years old. Raised 7 children during the Depression. Lost 2 of them to scarlet fever." She closed the album. When she was 80, someone asked her what kept her going through all the hardship. You know what she said? I shook my head. She said I didn't have the luxury of giving up. Giving up is for people with options. I only ever had one option. Forward. Helen sat back down across from me. You feel like you have no options right now, like Grant has taken everything. But that's not true. He wants you to feel powerless. That's how men like him operate. They make you believe you're nothing so you won't fight back. I wiped my eyes. What am I supposed to do? He has the money. He has the lawyers. He has his mother's connections. And what do you have? Nothing. I have nothing. Helen raised an eyebrow. Really? Nothing at all? No assets? No documents? No family history that might be useful? I thought about it. My mother died when I was 15. My father died when I was 22. He'd been a construction foreman, honest and hardworking, but never wealthy. All he left me was a small life insurance payout that I'd used for business school and a safety deposit box I'd never opened. Wait, I said slowly. My father left me a safety deposit box. I never looked inside. I always assumed it was just sentimental things. Old photos, maybe his watch. Helen leaned forward. You assumed? You never actually looked? Grant told me it was morbid to dwell on the past, that I should focus on the future we were building together. Helen made a sound of disgust. Of course he did. Honey, first thing tomorrow morning, we're going to that bank. I slept on Helen's couch that night. It was the first real sleep I'd had in weeks. The next morning, we drove to First National Bank downtown. The safe deposit box was in a secure vault in the basement. The banker led me to a private room and left me alone with a small metal box he hadn't touched in over a decade. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was my father's watch. I remembered him wearing it every day, checking the time before his shift started. I pressed it against my chest for a moment, breathing in a memory that smelled like sawdust and strong coffee. There were photographs too. My parents on their wedding day. Me as a baby. Dad at various construction sites, grinning proudly in his hard hat. And beneath everything else, a thick manila envelope. The handwriting on the front was my father's. For Rachel, if you ever need it. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were documents, stock certificates, and a letter. My little girl, the letter began. I'm writing this because I'm sick, and I know I won't be here much longer. There's something I never told you, something I was saving for the right time. I guess if you're reading this, the right time is now. In 1995, I did some work for a young architect named Gerald Sterling. He was starting his own firm but didn't have enough capital. I believed in him. I lent him $50,000, my entire life savings, in exchange for 15% of any company he started. He called it a gentleman's agreement. I called it an investment in someone I trusted. He never paid me back. He never acknowledged the debt. When his company took off, he pretended our deal never existed. I didn't have the money to fight him, and I had you to take care of. So I let it go. Gerald Sterling died in 2010. His son Grant runs the company now. I don't know if these old stock certificates are worth anything. The lawyers I asked said it was complicated, something about holding companies and corporate structures I didn't understand. But I kept everything, just in case. You're smarter than me, Rachel. You went to business school. If there's any way to get what's rightfully ours, you'll find it. I'm sorry I couldn't give you more, but I gave you what I could. A chance. I love you, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. Dad, I read the letter 3 times. By the end, I was crying so hard I could barely see. Gerald Sterling, Grant's father. My father had trusted him, and he'd been betrayed. Now his son was doing the same thing to me. But my father had kept proof. I gathered everything and rushed back to Helen's car. She took one look at my face and knew something had changed. Good news or bad news? I don't know yet, I said, clutching the envelope, but I think I might not be as powerless as Grant thinks. Helen started the car. Then let's find out. We spent the rest of the day tracking down James Whitmore, a semi-retired attorney who had known my father. He agreed to meet us at his home office, a cluttered room filled with law books and the smell of pipe tobacco. I handed him the stock certificates in my father's letter. He examined them for nearly an hour, making notes, cross-referencing documents on his ancient computer. Finally, he looked up. Rachel, these certificates are legitimate. Your father invested in Sterling Architecture Group, the original holding company that Gerald Sterling founded. That company was dissolved in 2012, and its assets were rolled into Sterling and Associates, the firm your husband currently runs. So they're worthless? Not necessarily. If these certificates were never properly bought out during the dissolution, you may have a valid claim. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I need to do more research. Corporate genealogy like this takes time. But there's something else. What? The structure of Sterling and Associates is unusual. Grant is the CEO, but the company is actually owned by a holding company called Sterling Family Trust. That trust was established by Gerald Sterling before he died. And according to public records, the beneficiary structure of that trust was never fully resolved after Gerald's death. What does that mean? It means, James said slowly, that the question of who actually owns Sterling and Associates might be more complicated than your husband realizes. For the first time since I'd stood in that hospital hallway, I felt something that wasn't despair. Hope. It was fragile. It might be false, but it was there. How long do you need to research this? I asked. A week, maybe 2. James held up a warning hand. But Rachel, I need you to understand something. Grant's family has resources and connections that I don't. His mother, Margaret, has been manipulating legal outcomes in this county for decades. Even if we find something, fighting them won't be easy. I don't need easy, I said. I just need possible. James smiled. Your father said the same thing once. You're definitely his daughter. I left his office with a plan. Keep my head down. Wait for James to find answers. Don't let Grant know I was fighting back. But Grant wasn't going to give me that luxury. 2 days later, Helen and I came home from a grocery run to find an envelope taped to her front door. Inside was a legal notice. Grant was filing for emergency custody of my unborn child. The grounds cited were my alleged mental instability and violent tendencies. There was a court date 1 week away. He's not waiting, Helen said grimly. He's trying to take your baby before it's even born. I looked at the notice, at Grant's lawyer's name, at the judge assigned to the case. Then I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. What could possibly be funny right now? Helen demanded. He's scared, I said. Don't you see? If he really had all the power, he wouldn't need to rush this. He wouldn't need emergency motions and legal threats. He's trying to overwhelm me before I can fight back, which means he knows there's something to fight for. Helen considered this. You might be right, or he might just be a vindictive monster who enjoys cruelty. He's definitely that too, I admitted. But he's also scared. I put my hand on my belly, where my daughter was kicking as if she agreed. Good. The week before the custody hearing was the longest of my life. James Whitmore worked around the clock, digging through decades of corporate filings. Helen made endless pots of tea and kept me fed when I forgot to eat. And I spent every waking hour preparing my defense. But 3 days before the hearing, everything changed. James called me at 7 in the morning, his voice urgent. Rachel, I found something. You need to come to my office right now. An hour later, I was sitting across from him, my heart pounding. The stock certificates your father left you, James began. I traced them through every corporate restructuring. Your father was right. They were never properly bought out. They're still valid. I felt tears pricking my eyes. But here's where it gets interesting. James pulled out a stack of documents. When Gerald Sterling died, his estate went through probate. The Sterling Family Trust, the entity that owns Sterling and Associates, was supposed to be distributed according to his will. Grant inherited the operating companies, the day-to-day business. But the trust itself, the holding company that owns everything, was supposed to go into a conservatorship until certain conditions were met. What conditions? James looked at me. According to Gerald's will, the trust was to remain in conservatorship until his heir, meaning Grant, quote, produced a legitimate child within a sanctioned marriage to carry on the Sterling name. I stared at him. Grant and I don't have children yet. The baby isn't born. Exactly, and because that condition hasn't been met, the trust has technically been in legal limbo for 15 years. Grant has been running the company, but he doesn't actually own it. Not fully, not yet. So who does own it? That's the complicated part. James spread out more papers. Because of the unresolved probate and your father's original investment, There's a legitimate argument that the ownership structure is fundamentally flawed. If we can prove that your father's stake was never legally extinguished, you might own a significant portion of the trust. How significant? James took a deep breath. Potentially controlling interest. Potentially 90%. The room went silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. 90%, I repeated. Are you saying I might own the company Grant thinks is his? I'm saying it's possible, but Rachel, this is going to require serious legal work. We'd need forensic accountants, corporate attorneys, probably months of litigation. Grant and his mother will fight this with everything they have. But there's a chance. There's a chance. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. We spent the next 2 days building our case. James brought in a forensic accountant who owed him a favor. Helen dug through public records like a woman possessed. I organized everything into a timeline that stretched back 30 years. By the night before the custody hearing, we had a strategy. I wouldn't just defend myself. I would go on the offensive. I would present evidence that Grant was the unstable one, that he'd been living a double life, that he'd been siphoning company funds to support his mistress. The morning of the hearing, I put on the best maternity dress I owned. I looked at myself in Helen's mirror. You can do this, I told my reflection. You have to do this. The family courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, an American flag in the corner, a judge's bench that seemed to loom over everything. Grant was already there with his lawyer, a slick man in a $3,000 suit. Margaret Sterling sat behind them in the gallery, her face a mask of cold satisfaction. Grant looked at me and smiled. That smile said, "You've already lost. You just don't know it yet." The hearing began. Grant's lawyer painted a picture of me as a deranged woman, paranoid, delusional, a danger to my unborn child. Mrs. Sterling has exhibited classic signs of pregnancy-induced psychosis, he argued. She has made wild accusations about affairs and secret children. She has attempted to sabotage the family business. She has demonstrated an inability to maintain stable housing. For the safety of the child, we request emergency custody be granted to Mr. Sterling immediately upon birth. I listened to lie after lie, my fists clenched under the table. Then it was my turn. I stood up slowly, one hand on my belly. Your Honor, I began, everything you've just heard is a lie. I presented my evidence. The photograph from the hospital, the audio recording, bank statements showing payments to Tiffany Wells. Grant's face went pale. Margaret Sterling's jaw tightened, but I wasn't finished. Furthermore, I continued, I have evidence suggesting that Mr. Sterling has been embezzling funds from his own company, that the corporate structure he claims to own is built on fraudulent foundations, that his entire empire is based on theft, starting with $50,000 his father, stole from my father 30 years ago. I laid out the stock certificates, the forensic accountant's preliminary findings, the probate documents showing the unresolved trust. Grant's lawyer jumped to his feet. Objection. This is completely irrelevant to a custody hearing. It's relevant, I shot back, because it shows a pattern of deception. Grant Sterling is not a stable, trustworthy father. He's a con man who has been lying to everyone, including me, for years. The judge held up a hand for silence. Mrs. Sterling, he said slowly, these are serious allegations. I know, Your Honor, and I can prove every single one. The judge looked at Grant, at Margaret, at the pile of documents in front of me. I'm going to call a recess, he said. I want to review this evidence. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. As we stood to leave, I caught Grant's eye. He wasn't smiling anymore. For the first time, he looked afraid. I wish I could tell you that was the moment everything turned around, that justice prevailed and the good guys won. But life isn't that simple. When we reconvened, the judge's face was troubled. Mrs. Sterling, he said, I've reviewed your evidence. It's concerning. I felt a surge of triumph. However, he continued, and my heart sank, I've also received documentation from Mr. Sterling's legal team that raises questions about your claims. He held up a piece of paper. This is a canceled check dated 2011. It shows that your father was paid $75,000 to buy out his stake in Sterling Architecture Group. According to this document, your stock certificates are worthless. I stared at the check, at my father's name. at his signature. That's impossible, I said. My father died with $3,000 in the bank. He never had $75,000. Be that as it may, the judge said, without further evidence to contradict this document, I cannot take your corporate claims into consideration. He turned to Grant. Mr. Sterling, given the circumstances, I'm not prepared to grant emergency custody, but I am ordering Mrs. Sterling to undergo a psychiatric evaluation, and I'm scheduling a full custody hearing for 60 days from now. He banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. Grant walked past me on his way out. He leaned close, his voice a whisper. Nice try, Rachel. But you're playing checkers. I'm playing chess. He smiled that terrible smile. See you in 60 days. I stood in that courtroom, 8 months pregnant, and watched him walk away with his mother. The canceled check was a forgery. I knew it. I could feel it. But knowing something and proving it were two very different things. And I had just run out of time. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in destruction. Grant didn't just want to beat me, he wanted to annihilate me, to leave nothing behind but scorched earth and broken dreams. It started with the press conference. I'm heartbroken to announce that my wife Rachel has suffered a complete mental breakdown, Grant told a room full of reporters. His voice cracked with perfectly rehearsed emotion. She's been spreading lies about affairs and secret children. She's attempting to extort my family. For the safety of our unborn child, I've had to seek legal protection. He dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. I asked for privacy during this difficult time. The story was everywhere within hours. My face was on every news site, every gossip blog, every social media feed. And the comments, God, the comments. Gold digger got caught. Classic crazy pregnant wife syndrome. Poor Grant, stuck with a psycho. The internet had tried and convicted me without hearing a single word of my defense. Helen tried to shield me from the worst of it, but there was no escaping the avalanche of hatred. Every time I looked at my phone, there were more death threats, more people telling me I deserved to lose my baby, more strangers who had decided I was the villain of this story. 2 days after the press conference, the stress finally caught up with me. I was in Helen's kitchen, making toast because it was the only thing that didn't make me nauseous, when I felt it. A sharp, twisting pain in my abdomen. Then another, then another. Helen, I gasped. Something's wrong. She took one look at my face and grabbed her car keys. 20 minutes later, I was in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped with terrifying urgency. The contractions were coming every few minutes now. 8 months pregnant. Too early. Way too early. The doctor was a young woman with kind eyes and worried hands. Mrs. Morgan, we're doing everything we can to stop the labor. You need to stay calm. Stress is the worst thing for the baby right now. Stay calm. My husband was trying to steal my child. The whole world thought I was crazy. And now my body was failing me too. I closed my eyes and prayed, please, not my baby. Take everything else, but please, please, not my baby. The medication worked. The contractions slowed, then stopped. But I had to stay for observation. At least 72 hours, the doctor said. I thought I would finally get some rest. I was wrong. A nurse came to my room the next morning, her expression uncomfortable. Mrs. Morgan, I'm sorry, but your husband has contacted the hospital. He's expressed concerns about your mental state. I sat up, ignoring the pull of the IV in my arm. What does that mean? It means we're required to conduct a psychiatric evaluation before we can discharge you. The nurse avoided my eyes. Hospital policy when there are concerns about patient safety. Patient safety. They were calling me a danger to myself. Grant's fingerprints were all over this. The psychiatric evaluation was humiliating. A doctor I'd never met asked me questions designed to make me sound crazy. Do you believe your husband is plotting against you? Do you feel like people are watching you? Have you had thoughts of harming yourself or others? I answered honestly. Yes, my husband was plotting against me. I had evidence. I wasn't paranoid. I was being persecuted. The doctor wrote notes and nodded in a way that made me feel like everything I said was being used against me. They kept me for 4 days. 4 days in a locked psychiatric unit, 7.5 months pregnant, unable to leave, unable to call anyone except Helen during supervised phone hours. 4 days of grant winning. When they finally released me, Helen was waiting in the lobby. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Rachel," she said, "there's something I need to tell you." "What? What else could possibly go wrong?" She handed me a piece of paper. "An eviction notice. Someone filed a fraudulent lien against my house," Helen said. "They're claiming I owe $200,000 in unpaid contractor fees. The company that filed the claim is a shell corporation." I traced it. "To who?" Helen's voice was flat. "Margaret Sterling." I sank into a lobby chair, my head spinning. "They're punishing you for helping me." "I know. Helen, I'm so sorry. I've ruined your life." Helen sat down beside me and took my hand. "No, honey, they've ruined their own. They just don't know it yet." She squeezed my fingers. "But right now, we need a place to stay. I've got some savings. There's a motel on Route 9 that's clean enough." A motel. After everything, we were down to a motel on Route 9. Grant Sterling had taken my home, my reputation, my health, and now he'd taken Helen's home too. I thought about giving up. I really did. Just signing whatever he wanted, taking the scraps he offered, accepting defeat. But then I felt my daughter kick, a strong, defiant kick right against my ribs, like she was saying, "Don't you dare quit on me." I put my hand on my belly. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, baby girl, mommy's not done fighting." The motel room was exactly as depressing as you'd imagine. Thin walls, stained carpet, a persistent smell of cigarettes and desperation. But Helen had bought flowers for the windowsill. She'd hung a print of a sunset over the bed. She'd made it feel almost like a home. "What's our next move?" I asked, lying on the bed with my feet elevated. The doctor had told me to rest as much as possible. The baby was stable but stressed. Helen sat at the small desk, surrounded by papers. "I've been thinking," she said, "that canceled check Margaret produced. The one that supposedly proves your father was paid off. What about it? The check is dated 2011, but I did some digging." She pulled out a document. The bank account it was drawn from wasn't open until 2013. I sat up slowly. "How do you know that?" "I still have friends from my paralegal days. One of them works at First National. She couldn't give me official records, but she confirmed it off the record. That account didn't exist when the check was supposedly written. So the check is forged. The check is forged." Helen's eyes gleamed. "And if they forged one document, they probably forged others. We just need to prove it." "How?" "We need the original documents, the real ones. And we need someone on the inside who can get them for us." I thought about Sterling and Associates, about the employees I used to know, about who might be willing to help. "Henderson," I said slowly, "the CFO. Grant bullied him into silence, but I don't think he's a bad person. Just scared. Then we need to make him more scared of the alternative," Helen said. "Prison for embezzlement is a powerful motivator." I looked at my neighbor, this 62-year-old woman in a purple bathrobe, who had somehow become my general in a war I never asked to fight. "Helen, why are you doing all this? You barely knew me before this happened." Helen was quiet for a moment. "Because I was you once," she finally said. 40 years ago. My first husband was a lot like Grant. Charming, manipulative, cruel. I was too scared to fight back. I lost everything." "What happened?" "He died. Heart attack at 45. And I spent the next 20 years rebuilding my life from nothing." Helen stood up and walked to the window. "I swore I would never let another woman go through what I went through. Not if I could help it." She turned back to me. "You're not alone, Rachel. You never have to be alone again." I felt tears rolling down my cheeks. Not sad tears. Something else. Something like gratitude. Something like love. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me yet." Helen picked up her phone. "Thank me when we've won." The next few days passed in a strange rhythm of hope and despair. Helen tracked down Henderson's home address. I wrote him a letter explaining what Grant had done, what Margaret had done, what we knew about the forged documents. I offered him a choice. Help us and receive immunity. Stay silent and face prosecution. We sent the letter. Then we waited. While we waited, I had the psychiatric evaluation the court ordered. 3 hours of questions, 3 hours of trying to prove I wasn't crazy to a doctor who had already been briefed by Grant's lawyers. I must have passed because no one tried to lock me up again. But the experience left me feeling hollowed out. Violated. James Whitmore called with updates. He was still researching the corporate structure, still trying to find the smoking gun that would prove my ownership claim. But Grant's lawyers were blocking every request for documents. Every motion he filed was countered. Every avenue was closing. Then, exactly 14 days before the custody hearing, two things happened. The first was good news. Henderson agreed to meet. We chose a coffee shop in a strip mall 20 miles outside of town, somewhere Grant would never think to look. I wore sunglasses and kept my head down. Henderson looked terrible. He'd lost weight. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands trembled as he stirred his coffee. I didn't want to do any of it, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Grant threatened to fire me. His mother threatened to have me blacklisted. I have 2 kids in college. I couldn't afford to fight back. I know, I said gently. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because you can make this right. What do you need? The real financial records, before they were altered, and any documentation about the trust structure that Grant doesn't want anyone to see. Henderson took a shaky breath. There's a backup server. Off-site. Grant doesn't know I kept copies of everything. His voice dropped. He's been siphoning money for years. Millions, not just for Tiffany. There are properties in the Caymans, shell companies in Delaware. He was planning to gut the company and disappear. He slid a flash drive across the table. Everything's on here. It's enough to put him in prison. I took the flash drive with hands that trembled as much as his. Thank you, Henderson. You're doing the right thing. He laughed bitterly. I should have done the right thing years ago. He stood to leave, then paused. Mrs. Morgan, your father was a good man. I met him once back when he was working with Gerald Sterling. He didn't deserve what happened to him. Neither do you. He walked away before I could respond. I sat in that coffee shop, holding a flash drive that might contain my salvation, and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. But hope, I was learning, was a dangerous thing. The second thing that happened came that night. Helen and I were in the motel room downloading files from Henderson's flash drive when someone knocked on the door. Helen grabbed a lamp, ready to swing it if necessary. I positioned myself behind the bed. Who is it? Open the door, Rachel. The voice was familiar. Male. Cold. Grant. My blood ran cold. How did he find us? I can smell desperation from miles away, Grant said through the door. And you reek of it. Now open up. I want to talk. I'm calling the police. Grant laughed. Go ahead. Tell them what? That your estranged husband wants to have a conversation? They'll be thrilled to mediate a domestic dispute at 10 p.m. He paused. I know you met with Henderson today. I know he gave you something. Here's the thing, Rachel. It doesn't matter. What do you mean? Open the door and I'll explain. Against Helen's frantic hand signals, I walked to the door. I didn't open it, but I looked through the peephole. Grant was alone. He was smiling that terrible smile. Whatever Henderson gave you, Grant said, I can make it disappear. I've already reported him for theft of company property. His flash drive is stolen evidence, inadmissible. And Henderson himself will be arrested by morning. You can't do that. I already have. Grant leaned closer to the door. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to offer you a deal. One last chance before I destroy you completely. What deal? Sign the divorce papers. Accept $50,000. Walk away. Disappear. And my daughter? I'll give you weekends. Supervised weekends. It's more than you deserve. My hands curled into fists. And if I refuse? Grant's smile widened. Then I release everything. The edited documents about your father. The building collapse he was allegedly involved in. 3 workers died, Rachel. Your father might have been innocent, but it won't matter. Once it's in the press, his name will be mud forever. My father was innocent. Maybe. But who's going to believe you? The crazy wife? The gold digger? Grant shook his head. I've already won, Rachel. You're just too stubborn to see it. He slid an envelope under the door. Sign the papers. Leave them at the front desk. You have until noon tomorrow. I heard his footsteps retreating down the walkway. A car engine starting, then silence. Helen rushed to my side. Rachel, what are we going to do? I picked up the envelope. Inside were the divorce papers. $50,000. supervised weekends with my own daughter, everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, everything I was, reduced to a signature. I sat down on the bed, the papers in my lap, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I cried. Not quiet tears, ugly, heaving sighs that shook my whole body. Helen held me. She didn't say it would be okay. She didn't promise things would work out. She just held me and let me break. When I finally stopped crying, I felt empty, hollow, like everything that made me myself had been poured out. Maybe I should just sign, I whispered. At least then it would be over. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want anymore. I looked at Helen. I'm so tired, Helen. I'm so tired of fighting, of losing, of hoping and having that hope crushed over and over again. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. What could possibly be funny? You remind me of myself, Helen said, right before I found my grandmother's ring. What? When my first husband died, I was left with nothing. No money, no home, no hope. I was ready to give up. And then I was cleaning out his desk, and I found a ring that had belonged to my grandmother. It wasn't worth much, maybe $200, but it reminded me of her, of everything she survived. And I thought if she could raise 7 children during the Depression, I can survive this. Helen took my hands. Rachel, your father left you those stock certificates because he believed in you. He believed you could do what he couldn't. Are you really going to let Grant Sterling prove him wrong? I looked at the papers in my lap, at the pittance Grant was offering, at the future he was trying to steal. And I thought about my daughter, about what I wanted her to know about her mother, that she gave up, that she let the bad guys win. No, I would not let that be my story. I stood up. Call James, I said. Tell him I need everything he has on the trust structure. Henderson might be compromised, but there has to be another way. What are you going to do? Helen asked. I walked to the tiny motel desk and sat down with a pen and paper. I'm going to write down everything I know, every conversation, every document, every lie Grant has ever told. And then I'm going to figure out how to prove it. And the deadline? Noon tomorrow? I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had finally stopped being afraid. Let him wait. The night before Grant's deadline, I didn't sleep. I sat at that tiny motel desk and I wrote everything. The hospital, Tiffany, the security guards, the press conferences, the psychiatric hold, every humiliation, every betrayal, every moment where Grant had twisted the knife. And as I wrote, patterns emerged. Grant's entire scheme depended on controlling the narrative, making me look crazy, making himself look like the victim, keeping everyone focused on my alleged instability while he quietly stole everything. But narratives can be changed. At 6 in the morning, Helen woke up and found me surrounded by papers. Did you sleep at all? No, but I think I have a plan. I laid it out for her. Grant's power comes from his public image. Everyone thinks he's the charming, successful businessman married to a crazy woman. But what if we could show them the truth? How? We can't fight him in court. His mother owns the judges. We can't fight him in the press. He controls the story. But there's one place where he's vulnerable. Helen leaned forward. His ego. Exactly. Grant can't resist showing off. He can't resist proving how smart he is. If we can get him to brag about what he's done, to explain it to someone he thinks can't fight back, we might be able to record it. Isn't that illegal? Not in this state. We're a one-party consent jurisdiction. If I'm part of the conversation, I can record it. Helen looked skeptical. And you think Grant will just confess everything to you? No, he'll never confess to me. He's too careful. I paused. But he might confess if he thinks he's already won. If he thinks I've given up. I picked up the divorce papers. I'm going to call him, tell him I'll sign, ask him to meet me somewhere public to finalize everything. And then I'm going to play the broken woman one last time. Appeal to his ego. Ask him to explain how he did it. Make him think I just want closure. Helen was quiet. It's risky. Everything is risky now. But it's our best shot. At 8 in the morning, I called Grant. He answered on the first ring. Changed your mind? I kept my voice small. Defeated. Yes, I'll sign. But I want to understand some things first. I want to know how you did it. All of it. I need closure, Grant. There was a long pause. Closure, he repeated. That's very mature of you, Rachel. I'm tired of fighting. I just want this to be over. Another pause. I could almost hear him calculating. Fine, meet me at La Maison tonight, 8 o'clock. We'll have dinner like civilized people. I'll answer your questions, and you'll sign the papers. Okay, and Rachel, don't try anything clever. I always know. He hung up. Helen stared at me. La Maison? That's the fanciest restaurant in the city. I know. Very public, very visible, which means I need witnesses. I looked at Helen. Can you find Detective Cole, the one who was investigating financial crimes at the company? I can try. Tell him to be at La Maison tonight. Tell him I'm going to deliver Grant Sterling's confession on a silver platter. The hours before dinner were the longest of my life. I took a shower. I did my hair and makeup for the first time in weeks. I put on the nicest maternity dress I own, a simple black number that made me look elegant rather than desperate. Helen helped me with a wireless microphone hidden in my necklace. You sure about this? She asked for the 10th time. No, I admitted, but I'm going anyway. At 7:45, I walked into La Maison. The restaurant was everything I expected. White tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, waiters who moved like ghosts. The kind of place where fortunes were made and destroyed over appetizers. Grant was already seated at a corner table. He stood when he saw me, playing the gentleman for the other diners. Rachel, you look beautiful. I felt sick. Thank you for meeting me. We sat. Grant ordered wine for himself, sparkling water for me. He made small talk about the restaurant, the weather, the upcoming baby, as if we were just a normal couple having dinner. Finally, when our entrees arrived, I put down my fork. Grant, I need to understand something. He raised an eyebrow. What? How did you do it? All of it? I thought I was smart. I thought I knew you. But you played me completely. From the very beginning. Grant smiled. Not his public smile. His real smile. The one I'd seen through the hospital door. You want to know? Yes. Why? Because I need to know if I could have seen it coming. If there were signs I missed, I need to know for my own sanity. Grant took a sip of wine. He was enjoying this. The truth? I knew who you were from the beginning. What do you mean? I researched you before we met, before the coffee shop where we accidentally bumped into each other. All of it was planned. The room seemed to spin. Why me? Because of your father. Grant leaned back. I found out about his investment years ago, the stock certificates, the claim against the company. I knew that if I didn't neutralize that threat, it could come back to haunt me someday. So I decided to neutralize you instead. By marrying me? By controlling you. I made you fall in love with me. I isolated you from anyone who might help you see the truth. I convinced you to let me handle all the business details. And then, when I had everything I needed, I started building my exit strategy. Tiffany, among others. Grant waved his hand dismissively. Tiffany was useful, entertaining, but she was never the main event. She was just the reason I could give for leaving you. The crazy, jealous wife who couldn't accept reality. And the baby! Her baby? Grant's smile flickered. That was supposed to be insurance. A new heir to satisfy the trust conditions. But things have gotten complicated. How so? Never mind. The point is, Rachel, you never had a chance. You were a pawn in a game you didn't even know you were playing. I am simply better than you. Better at strategy, better at manipulation, better at winning. I looked at my husband, at the monster wearing his face. And my father? The documents Margaret produced? Grant laughed. Forged, obviously. Your father never got paid a dime. He died poor because he was too proud to fight for what was his. And you almost made the same mistake. He leaned forward. But here's the difference, Rachel. You get to live. You get your $50,000 and your supervised weekends. That's more than he ever got. So sign the papers and let's end this charade. I picked up the pen. Grant watched, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Then I smiled. Grant, I have one more question. What? Have you ever wondered why I chose this restaurant? Grant frowned. You didn't choose it. I did. I shook my head slowly. No, I suggested La Maison specifically. I asked Helen to research which restaurants Detective Cole likes to visit. He's sitting at the bar right now. Grant's head whipped around. There was Detective Marcus Cole watching us, and beside him, a woman I didn't recognize but who was taking notes. The district attorney, I said, very interested in corporate fraud. Grant turned back to me, his face ashen. This was a setup. Every word you just said was recorded. I touched my necklace. One-party consent, remember? You taught me to always read the fine print. You little, Grant started. And I think when they analyze those forged documents, when they talk to Henderson, when they review the financial records, they're going to find a lot more than just a cheating husband. I stood up, my hand protectively on my belly. I'm not signing anything, Grant, and you're not taking my daughter. The only thing you're going to get is exactly what you deserve. Detective Cole was approaching the table now, two uniformed officers behind him. Grant Sterling, Cole said, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. Grant's face twisted with rage. He lunged toward me. You think this is over? You think you've won? My mother will have me out in an hour. She'll destroy you. The officers grabbed him before he could reach me. I watched them handcuff my husband, the man I had loved, the man who had planned my destruction from the moment we met. He was still screaming threats as they let him out. I didn't look away. The aftermath of Grant's arrest was chaos. News crews descended on La Maison. The district attorney held an impromptu press conference. My face was everywhere again, but this time the story was different. Pregnant wife exposes billionaire husband's secret life. Woman brings down corporate empire with hidden recording. The queen takes down the king. I didn't do interviews. I didn't make statements. I let the evidence speak for itself. But Grant's arrest was just the beginning. The next 72 hours brought revelation after revelation. Henderson, who had been arrested on Grant's orders, was released when the charges were proven fraudulent. In exchange for full immunity, he cooperated completely with investigators. The financial records were explosive. Grant hadn't just been embezzling. He'd been systematically gutting the company for years. There were shell corporations, offshore accounts, properties no one knew existed. The total amount missing was estimated at over $15 million. And then there was Tiffany. She was brought in for questioning the day after Grant's arrest. I expected her to stick to the story, to protect Grant, to blame everything on me. Instead, she flipped. I have recordings too, she told investigators. I've been recording Grant for 2 years. I was planning to blackmail him eventually. But this works too. The recordings she provided were devastating. Grant discussing plans to abandon both families once he had the money. Grant laughing about how stupid I was. Grant outlining exactly how he'd stolen from the company. But the biggest revelation was something I never expected. The DNA test for Tiffany's baby came back. Grant wasn't the father. Tiffany had been sleeping with Grant's accountant the entire time. She'd chosen Grant as her mark specifically because she knew about his schemes. She was running her own con inside his con. When Grant found out from his jail cell where he was awaiting arraignment, he reportedly had a complete breakdown. I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for him. 4 days after the arrest, James Whitmore called me to his office. I have news, he said. Big news. Good news or bad news? That depends on your perspective. He spread documents across his desk. We finally got access to the Sterling family trust records, the ones Margaret was hiding. And Rachel, you're not going to believe what we found. Tell me. James took a deep breath. The trust structure that Gerald Sterling set up is even more complicated than we thought. Grant was named as the operational beneficiary, meaning he could run the companies. But the actual ownership of the trust was contingent on several conditions being met, including producing an heir within a legitimate marriage. Right. But here's the thing. James pointed to a clause. The trust also included provisions for investors who were never properly bought out. Your father's investment was specifically mentioned. What? Gerald Sterling knew he'd cheated your father. In his will, which was written when he was dying and apparently feeling guilty, he included a clause stating that if any original investors or their descendants could prove they were never properly compensated, they would be entitled to their original percentage of the holding company. But the canceled check said my father was paid. James smiled. The canceled check was forged. Margaret created it to protect Grant's inheritance. But we now have the original bank records. That account didn't exist when the check was supposedly written. The forgery is provable. So what does this mean? It means, James said, that your father's 15% stake was never extinguished. It means that Gerald's guilt clause in the will is enforceable. And it means that because Grant never fulfilled the heir requirement, and because his fraud has voided his beneficiary status, the trust is now in legal limbo. And I can claim it? James laughed. Rachel, you don't just have a claim. According to our calculations, between your father's original investment and the chaos Grant created, you have grounds to petition for controlling interest in the trust. We're talking about 90% ownership of Sterling and Associates. The room went silent. I sat there trying to process what he was telling me. 90%, I repeated. Maybe more, depending on how the court interprets the provisions. But Grant ran the company for 15 years. Running isn't owning. Grant was always just a manager. He just didn't know it. And his mother has been committing fraud for decades to hide that fact. I thought about my father, about the $50,000 he'd invested, about how he'd been cheated and had never had the resources to fight back. He'd given me those stock certificates, hoping I might someday get what he couldn't. He had no idea what they were really worth. James, I said slowly, what happens to Margaret? She's being indicted. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy. Her connections are evaporating as we speak. It turns out that when you're caught dead to rights, even judges who owe you favors tend to distance themselves. Good. There's one more thing. James slid a document across the desk. This arrived yesterday. It was a letter from Margaret Sterling's lawyer. She wants to negotiate. What could she possibly have to negotiate with? Her testimony. She knows where all the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. She's offering to cooperate fully in exchange for leniency. I read the letter. It was carefully worded, full of legal language and conditional offers. What do you think I should do? James leaned back. That's not my decision to make. But I'll tell you what I'd consider. Margaret has an information that could expedite everything. With her cooperation, you could have control of the company in months instead of years. Without it, we're looking at prolonged litigation. And Grant, he's facing federal charges, embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering. Even with the best lawyers, he's looking at 15 to 20 years. I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I made a decision. Tell Margaret I'll consider her offer, I said, but only after she provides one thing first. What's that? A full written confession. Everything she did. Everything Grant did. Everything Gerald did to my father. I want it all documented, signed, and notarized. That's a big ask. Then she can take her chances in court. James smiled. I'll convey the message. 1 week later, I had Margaret's confession. Every forgery, every bribe, every manipulation spanning 3 decades. It was 57 pages long. I read every word, and then I started planning the final act. 3 weeks after Grant's arrest, I gave birth to my daughter. I named her Eleanor Morgan, after my grandmother on my father's side. A woman I never met, but who, according to family stories, never backed down from a fight. Eleanor came into the world screaming, and I loved her immediately with a ferocity that took my breath away. Helen was in the delivery room with me. She cried almost as much as I did. She's perfect, Helen whispered, holding Eleanor's tiny hand. She's mine, I said. That's all that matters. While I recovered from childbirth, James Whitmore and his team finalized the legal paperwork for my claim against the Sterling Family Trust. The hearing was scheduled for exactly 60 days after Eleanor's birth. Poetic timing. I walked into the courtroom carrying my daughter in a car seat. I wore a simple navy dress, my father's watch on my wrist, Eleanor's birth certificate in my briefcase. The judge was different from the one at the custody hearing. Margaret's connections had evaporated along with her freedom. She was currently under house arrest, awaiting her own trial. Grant was there too, escorted by federal marshals. He was thinner than I'd ever seen him. His suit didn't fit right anymore. His eyes had lost their predatory gleam. He looked at me when I entered. I looked back. Neither of us spoke. The hearing lasted 4 hours. James presented evidence of the original investment, the fraudulent Check. The trust provisions, Gerald Sterling's will with its guilt clause, Margaret's confession. Grant's lawyer tried to argue, but he had nothing. Every piece of evidence we presented was irrefutable. Every document was authenticated. Every witness cooperated. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood before the judge and told my story. My father was a construction foreman, I said. He worked 60-hour weeks his whole life. When he invested his life savings in Gerald Sterling's company, he believed he was building something for his family. He was betrayed. He died poor, and he died believing he'd failed me. I looked at Grant. For 5 years, I was married to a man who saw me as a means to an end. Who planned my destruction from the first moment we met? Who tried to steal my daughter, my reputation, and my future? I turned back to the judge. I'm not asking for revenge, Your Honor. I'm asking for justice. Justice for my father. Justice for my daughter. And yes, justice for myself. The judge deliberated for 45 minutes. When she returned, her face was solemn. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, she said, I find in favor of the petitioner. Rachel Morgan is hereby granted controlling interest in the Sterling Family Trust, representing 90% ownership of all associated entities, including Sterling and Associates. She looked at Grant. Mr. Sterling's beneficiary status is revoked due to documented fraud and failure to meet trust conditions. Additionally, this court recommends that all criminal proceedings against Mr. Sterling proceed with full consideration of the evidence presented today. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. I sat there, unable to move. I owned it, the company Grant thought was his empire, the legacy he'd killed for. It was mine. Grant was led past me on his way out. He stopped, the marshals pausing with him. You think you've won? He said. His voice was hollow. You think this is victory? I stood up, Eleanor's car seat in my hand. No, I said, this isn't victory. Victory would require there to be a contest. But there never was one, Grant. You were playing a game I didn't even know existed, and you still lost. I'll get out eventually. He tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. I'll find a way. Maybe. I stepped closer to him. But let me tell you what you'll find when you do. You'll find a company with my name on it. You'll find a daughter who doesn't know you exist. And you'll find a world that's completely forgotten you. I walked past him toward the exit. Grant screamed something after me. I didn't hear it. I didn't care. Outside, Helen was waiting on the courthouse steps. Well, I smiled. Call the board of directors. We have a meeting to schedule. 1 year later, the boardroom of what was now Morgan and Associates gleamed in the morning light. Fresh flowers on the credenza. A portrait of my father in his hard hat on the wall. I sat at the head of the table, Eleanor on my lap. She was grabbing at the papers in front of me, absolutely uninterested in quarterly earnings reports. Excellent work on the Tokyo expansion, I said to the board members assembled around the table. Our international revenue is up 200%, and we've received 3 industry awards this quarter. Arthur Penhaligon, who had stayed on as an advisor, smiled. Your father would be proud, Rachel. I looked at the portrait. I hope so. The meeting adjourned, and the board filed out with handshakes and congratulations. When the room was empty except for Eleanor and me, Helen appeared in the doorway. She had moved into a beautiful house I'd purchased for her. She'd refused at first, but I told her it was the least I could do for the woman who'd saved my life. There's someone here to see you, Helen said. She looked uncomfortable. Who? He says his name is Whitmore, but not James. This is someone else. Send him in. A young man entered the boardroom. He was maybe 30, with nervous eyes and an expensive suit that didn't quite fit him. Mrs. Morgan, he said, thank you for seeing me. I don't believe we've met. No, but I know who you are. He swallowed. My name is David Whitmore. James is my uncle. And I'm here because Grant Sterling is my half-brother. I went very still. I didn't know Grant had a half-brother. Neither did he until recently. Our father had an affair. My mother raised me in secret. I only found out who my father was when I was 18. David sat down without being invited, then realized what he'd done and half stood up again. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. Why are you here, David? Because I need you to know something. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. After everything came out about Grant and Margaret, I started looking into my own family history. I found things. Things nobody was supposed to find. What kind of things? David placed the envelope on the table. Gerald Sterling didn't just cheat your father. He cheated a lot of people. There were at least 12 other investors he defrauded over the years. Some of them lost everything. Some of them, he trailed off. Some of them what? One of them committed suicide. Another lost his house and his family. These were real people, Mrs. Morgan, and nobody ever held Gerald accountable. I looked at the envelope. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only one who can make it right. David's eyes met mine. You own the company now. You have the resources. Those people, the ones Gerald hurt, they deserve something. An acknowledgement, compensation. Something to show that their suffering mattered. I opened the envelope. Inside were names, addresses, documentation of investments that had disappeared into Gerald Sterling's pocket. 12 families. I thought about my father, about his $50,000, about how he died believing he had failed. These people were just like him, trusting souls who'd been destroyed by a predator. I'll need to have my lawyers verify this, I said. Of course. But if it checks out, I paused. If it checks out, I'll establish a foundation, a fund specifically for families harmed by Sterling financial crimes, past and present. David's eyes widened. Really? My father spent his whole life trying to build something good. I picked up Eleanor, who was starting to fuss. The best way I can honor him is to try to repair some of the damage his destroyers caused. David stood up, fumbling for words. Thank you, Mrs. Morgan. I don't even know what to say. Don't say anything. Just help me find these people. After David left, Helen came back in. That was unexpected. Yes. What are you thinking? I was thinking about my daughter, about the kind of world I wanted her to grow up in. I'm thinking that maybe victory isn't about winning. Maybe it's about making sure nobody else has to fight to the same battle. Helen smiled. Your grandmother Martha would approve. We stood there together looking out the window at the city spread below us. Somewhere out there, Grant Sterling was in a federal prison, serving a 15-year sentence. Margaret Sterling was under house arrest, her fortune seized, her connections severed. Tiffany Wells had disappeared to Europe, presumably looking for her next mark. The villains had been vanquished. The kingdom was secure. But I had learned something over the past year. Something important. Real strength isn't about defeating your enemies. It's about what you build after they're gone. I had a daughter who would grow up knowing her mother fought for her. I had a company that would be run with integrity and compassion. I had friends who had proven their loyalty in the darkest times. And I had a future that nobody, not Grant, not Margaret, not anyone could take away from me. That night after Eleanor was asleep, I sat at my desk at home. Helen's old desk, actually. She'd given it to me when I moved into my new house, saying it had brought her luck. I wrote a letter. Dear Eleanor, I began, you're too young to read this now. But someday, when you're older, I want you to know your story. I want you to know about your grandfather, who worked with his hands and died with a dream. I want you to know about Helen, who opened her door to a stranger and became family. I want you to know about the hard times, the dark times, when Mommy wasn't sure she would survive. And I want you to know about how we came out the other side. Life will throw things at you, baby girl. People will try to break you. Circumstances will conspire against you. There will be moments when giving up seems like the only option. But here's what I learned, the hard way, in the hardest year of my life. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's the calm before the tsunami. Hope is not foolish. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you alive. And love, real love, is not about finding someone perfect. It's about finding the people who will stand with you when everything falls apart. You are loved, Eleanor. You are wanted. You are worth fighting for. And someday, when you face your own battles, I hope you'll remember. The Queen is the most powerful piece on the board. I signed the letter and sealed it in an envelope marked for Eleanor on her 18th birthday. Then I turned off the light and went to check on my sleeping daughter. Through the nursery window, I could see the city lights spread out below like a blanket of stars. Somewhere out there, Grant Sterling was staring at concrete walls, wondering where it all went wrong. But I wasn't thinking about Grant. I was thinking about my father, about his faith in me, about the gift he had left behind. "I hope I made you proud, Dad," I whispered. The night was quiet. Eleanor breathed softly in her crib, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt at peace. The battles were over, the war was won, and the rest of our lives was just beginning. If this story resonates with you, if you know someone who needs to hear that they are stronger than they think, please share this video with them. Your likes and comments tell me what stories matter to you. They help me create more content that speaks to your heart. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. That way you will never miss a story that might be exactly what you need to hear on a difficult day. Now let's begin. This is the story of a pregnant wife, a silent betrayal, and a 90% share reveal that shocked a billionaire. What would you do if you discovered your husband holding another woman's baby while yours was still kicking inside you? Rachel Morgan stood outside hospital room 404, 7 months pregnant, watching through a crack in the door as her husband Grant whispered, "My little princess," to a newborn that wasn't hers. But here's the twist. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't burst through that door. She took a photo. She recorded his voice, and she walked away in silence. Because Rachel knew something Grant didn't. The most dangerous woman in the world is not the one who screams. It's the one who says nothing while planning everything. Grant Sterling thought he was the king of his empire. He thought his pregnant wife was just a pawn to be sacrificed. He had no idea that the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. This story will teach you how to protect yourself before it's too late. It will show you that your darkest moment is not your final chapter. And it will prove that karma always finds its address. If this message resonates with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story that speaks to your heart. Now let's begin.